Yeah, like Chloe has just mentioned, we're going to be speaking on actually introducing the new decision-making framework. My name is Changiz Raja. I'm Safeguarding and Quality Service Manager in North Ants, and I also have my colleague here, Claire. Claire, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Claire Bell. I'm the Service Manager for Quality Safeguarding and Assurance in West Northants Council.
Excellent, thank you. Next slide, please. Yes, introducing the new decision-making framework and the aims and objectives of it. And to start with, actually making safeguarding personal as well as safeguarding people, adults, is everybody's responsibility. And we actually have now devised a new decision-making framework. And aim of this decision-making framework is to actually, of this session also, is to actually understand this, and so how we can make a decision on safeguarding concerns that yourself would come across, and to understand the differences between abuse and neglect and risk to people, to use the key considerations in decision making and rationale for taking actions when you come across a situation where you feel that there is a need to protect an adult, or where you feel that an adult is at risk, and to understand capacity and consent in safeguarding. And it really is very important that, you know, the person that is deemed to be seen at a risk, that their capacity is taken note of and their consent is sought. Again, to identify challenges of our partners within the safeguarding practice, and to understand local authorities, because this decision-making framework is being implemented not just by the Northants but the West as well. So both local authorities' duties for safeguarding adults and expectations and outcomes. Thank you. Why was this framework revised? Since the unitary split between NNC and WNC, we continue to use the previous framework. The previous framework was actually revised in 2019, but since that revision, we continued to experience within both local authorities the increasing number of safeguarding concerns that have been received by us, and previously within the previous safeguarding framework, we actually rated safeguarding concerns that were low risk as non-reportable, and this was not in line with the current guidance and the legislation, as concerns that actually meet the three-step criteria test would be reportable under Section 42(1) of the CARE Act. Hence, there was a need to actually review the previous decision-making framework and come up with a new one. And the new one is to actually provide more clarity, consistency to support practitioners who make decisions, and referrals are made to identify potential alternative pathways for lower risk. So this decision-making framework actually gives guidance that if there are lower risk safeguarding concerns, that it takes you through as to what sort of actions you can take within your organizations. And Claire will give a bit more examples on that to understand this. Next slide, please. The decision-making framework, it aims to put in place consistent decision-making, whether a referral may require an inquiry, which is known as Section 42 inquiry, and safeguarding duties based on if a referral meets the three-stage criteria, which I earlier on mentioned in the previous slide, and that is, does the person have care and support needs, whether or not the local authority is meeting those needs. Also, is the person experiencing or is at risk of neglect or abuse, and as a result of those care and support needs, is the person is actually unable to protect themselves from either the risk or as a result of those care needs, is unable to protect themselves from either the risk of or the experience of abuse or neglect, and assist with differentiating between quality issues. So the framework would help with that and safeguarding risks and help yourselves to identify an appropriate and proportionate response. Yes, the decision making framework will support, as I was saying earlier on, to identify a level of concern, actions that can be taken to protect people by assessing the risks and the impact to the person, making decisions on safeguarding concerns, and understanding the difference between abuse, neglect, and the risk to the person, and key considerations in decision making and rationales for action taken. So the decision making framework would take you through that, which Claire will go a bit more deeply into the decision making framework. And understanding the capacity and consent, as earlier on mentioned, how important that is, and identify challenges of partners within the safeguarding practice, understanding adult social care's duty for safeguarding and expectations. And the next slide, I think that comes to you, Claire.
Thank you, Changiz. So as Changiz was saying, I'll sort of take you through a little bit more with a little bit more detail. So as Changiz was saying, is what the decision-making framework introduced was the use of key considerations. So those key considerations will support the referrer in understanding whether actually a safeguarding referral is required. What the key considerations are, just a list of questions really for you to consider when you're thinking about putting in a safeguarding referral. So that's around, the seriousness of the issue, the impact, looking at things like patterns and themes, and as I was saying, the impact and the level of risk before making a referral. Looking at the concerns, so basically if there are patterns, you may have, a number of sort of very lower level concerns, but actually when you put them all together, there's a question there, is there more to this than what I previously thought? So the use of those considerations is really important in understanding which level of risk the concern may be, and therefore what action needs to be undertaken. So I'll show you in the next slide. Under each type of abuse, it considers the impact of the person and describes that severity of the harm. And with safeguarding, the important thing is actually it's there to identify what action needs to be taken from the safeguarding perspective. And at each stage, there are potential other actions and other pathways that can be taken. Safeguarding is not, unique, as in, it comes through as a referral and all will be well. There are pathways, there are considerations, and there's a lot more work that needs to be undertaken to sort of mitigate those risks. There's additional guidance for the concerns that are the most reported to local authorities. So as well as sort of the key types of abuse, we've also given in the decision-making framework additional guidance for some of those areas. So we're looking at things around pressure areas, falls, medication errors, person-to-person abuse within organisations, etc. And there are also now 3 levels of concern, as opposed to the previous, as Changiz mentioned, reportable and non-reportable. The key reminder here is that actually everything is reportable if it meets that 3-step test. So has the person got care and support needs? Are they subject to abuse and neglect? Are they unable to protect themselves? I think when we look at sort of levels of risk and the key considerations, there's a couple of other things, and that's around whether other people may be at risk. So whilst the person themselves may not face significant harm, actually, what's the consequence for other people within the environment? Or, you know, are they at risk from the perpetrator? So that consideration to others is sort of really, really key. And I think to us, it's around providing the evidence. So it's not just around saying this is the issue, it's this is the issue because, and I'll talk more about that, sort of providing the evidence to support decision making as we go forward. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the decision-making framework now has 3 levels of concern. So low risk, made it simple, put it in green, records the incident and tells you to record the incident and take appropriate action to resolve. And these are examples of possible actions. The list is not exhaustive that we've written, but just gives you sort of examples for you to think about. Is this the same as the issue that I'm faced with? The other important thing is, you know, what may be a level of harm and risk to one person is not the same to the other. And that's why when we're saying about looking at key considerations, it's about that individual person, that individual circumstances. You know, when I mentioned about, you know, are they able to protect themselves? Somebody may have care and support needs, have had, you know, the concern is abuse or neglect, but actually they're able to protect themselves, another person may not be able to. So you should always consider those individual circumstances. And the sort of key thing here is that safeguarding is about understanding what the risks are and taking action to reduce the risks. So when you have a concern and you're not sure, actually don't wait. Do not wait before you take any action to protect that person from that level of risk. And ensure then that, you know, that you're looking at those lessons learned. So medium risk is noted in amber. And again, the instructions are there around recording the incident. You may want to refer to your own agency's safeguarding leads, policies and procedures, and again, take action to reduce the risk. If you're not sure in the medium risk, it may be that you want to contact the local authority safeguarding team for advice. High risk, very, very clear that actually this 3-stage criteria has been met and there's significant concerns. So in addition to the others about recording, taking appropriate action, actually you need to raise a safeguarding concern. Well, a child is involved, obviously you need to consider raising a concern also with the multi-agency safeguarding hub. So within the framework, there are case examples where the application of the framework is described based on different scenarios, including the risk matrix. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just an example of one type of abuse that's within the decision-making framework. I'm not going to go through them all today. There's a lot of information in there, so it's just about making you aware of how we've now framed the framework. So as you can see here, we're looking at physical abuse, and this is the act of causing physical harm to someone else or to self. We need to consider around self-neglect. And I just want to go back to the sort of definition for abuse and neglect before we start. We're talking about here is around deliberate acts, okay? So within safeguarding, we will always look for the perpetrator. And for self-neglect, obviously, that would be the individual. But if there's been a deliberate act, there should be a perpetrator, so that should be very, very clear. And when we look at neglect and the definition of neglect, it's fail to care for, or ignore, or disregard, or lack of attention. So again, it's very, very clear within those definitions, it's about somebody doing something to somebody else, or an organisation deliberately failing to do something. And I think we should consider that. You can see here there's the three levels of risk, and you can see actions that may be required under those three levels of risk. So if we look at low risk, we're talking about low impact, and we've given you some examples there of what may be considered low impact. I think, you know, the key consideration is no harm or impact has occurred. It's an isolated incident, and again, I'll refer back to when I was talking about patterns and themes, that actually may be low risk and may be low impact. However, it could be a number of events that then lead you to think something more is going on. And you can refer to that in the low risk, low impact, where there are a number of low-level concerns. Consideration should be given as to whether the threshold has been met due to that increased risk. So what we're saying under these situations is that further inquiries into safeguarding are unlikely to be met. However, what agencies should do is keep a written record of what's happened and the action that you've taken. And I think, again, that's the key thing. Safeguarding is about doing something to protect somebody and reducing the risk. And I think under safeguarding, it's everybody's business, as Changiz mentioned earlier. And whilst you may have given safeguarding, put in the safeguarding referral, it's around multi-agencies working together to reduce that risk, not one organisation. So, as I say, putting in a referral doesn't mean do nothing. And you may need to consider what you need to do. So what it does is, at the bottom, I'm afraid I think we've cut some of it off, is under low risk, we're looking at advice, information. It may be a review of a care plan that's caused the incident. It may be risk management planning. It could be that it's staff training. It could be that we need to undertake a review of the adult's needs. So there's always that thing around onward referral. It could be a complaint, it could be disciplinary action, or, you know, any of those actions. So you need to consider that at this stage. It doesn't mean safeguarding we don't need to do anything. But the important thing is to make sure, if you're in an organisation, that you actually document your decision making. So medium risk, it could be that a safeguarding referral is required in certain circumstances, and it does again depend on the severity. So you can see in the examples for this is unexplained, is a real sort of key thing here. Accumulation of minor incidents, repeated incidents and patterns. So you can see here the risk is getting higher, because you've got a number of things that are coming into play. So if you're not sure, myself and Changiz are more than happy to ring you through to the local authority to ask for a discussion in relation to those sort of concerns. If you're absolutely sure, put the referral through. Again, it could be in those situations, it could be a Care Act assessment, which is your resolution, carers assessment, a GP appointment around the unexplained bruising, referral to OT, referral to falls teams. You know, there's a number of different actions that could be required. And then we look at high risk, where there's significant harm or that significant risk of harm. And all of these incidents should be referred to the local authority But it also may be that you also need to contact police and emergency services. And I also think, you need to consider that actually, is this a criminal act? And the police must be consulted. I'll talk about capacity and consent in the next couple of slides. So here it's very clear there's unexplained significant injuries, it could be assault, and again, some of the wording that I use, deliberately withholding food, drinks, physical assaults, preventable incident, inappropriate restraint. So you can see that really does fall into that sort of definition of abuse and neglect. Next slide. So all the way throughout the decision-making framework, hopefully some of you have already had that chance to read through. You can see under the types of abuse and those frequent concerns that you can see it's all demonstrated in exactly the same way. So when we're making those considerations, obviously refer to the decision-making framework, and then consider whether there's reasonable cause to suspect that the adult is at risk and that safeguarding referral is required. And we refer to further information, and I think this is really important, is for us to make a decision around whether the person is at risk and meets that 3-stage criteria. We need the information on the referrals to be able to really make the right decision. So to us, it's really important that you give as much information as you possibly can, because all we're going to do is come back to you as a referrer if you've referred it through, asking for further information. Be very clear around what the person's care and support needs are. Be very clear that it is abuse and or neglect, and it's a deliberate act. So some of their examples are, to get a referral which says this person has this grade 3 pressure ulcer. Does that tell me if it's abuse or neglect? No, it just tells me somebody has got a pressure ulcer. Is it being managed? Is it being managed in the appropriate way? Is it that the person's health is deteriorating? So when we're looking at whether this meets the criteria under section 42.1, which is that 3-step test, we need that further information. So that's really, really vital for us to get a speedy decision about what we need to do next. Are there any immediate risks? So, as I was saying, referral, if it's required, put it through, but actually there may be immediate risks, and if so, what do you need to do? So for us, is what actions have you already taken? It's really important when you're putting in a referral, and seek advice. Always support organisations and individuals to put in an interim plan to manage the risks in relation to the person whilst we're undertaking further inquiries, so that we've got a much more robust understanding of the risk that the person's experiencing. We talked about, is the person aware of the referral? So consent is really, really important for us when you're considering a referral. If the person has capacity, unless there are real significant concerns that the person is under, for example, coercion and control, the person should be aware of making a referral. And we talk about making safeguarding personal, and that's all about the person needs to be involved. The person needs to understand and be very much involved in the outcome for them. It's their life, so they need to be part of that full safeguarding journey. So really making sure that you inform the person, if they have capacity, that a referral is being made. If you're not doing that, please identify what the risks are to the person of you informing them, And then as you know, the safeguarding leads, we will then also understand that risk and won't be contacting the person, for example, etc., for further information. So really being very clear on why you have made that decision. It could be that there are others that may be at risk of abuse and neglect by the same perpetrator, and that may be some of the reason. However, in the majority of incidences, we should make the person aware. So when we talk about capacity and consent being considered, always a contentious subject, but when you're considering it, capacity is, has that person got a mental disorder of the mind or brain? So have they got a diagnosis that may lead you to consider that they haven't got capacity? But capacity is decision specific, and it may be they don't have capacity to understand where they need to live, for example, but actually they can make other decisions. So it's being very clear when we say about capacity, is capacity and consent to the referral and their understanding of the risk that the safeguard that's led you to put in a safeguarding referral. It doesn't have to be a big conversation. Do you understand what's happening to you? Are they able to retain that information? Are they able to balance it up, the risk against, you know, what is happening to them? And are they able to weigh that up? So we're not asking for a full capacity assessment. What we're asking for is that consideration, and for you to articulate in the referral that you've actually considered this and why you haven't done, why you haven't sought consent. I'll go back to what I was saying before. Is there a perpetrator, or is this self-neglect? So for abuse and neglect to happen, there needs to be a perpetrator, and you need to be very clear on the perpetrator. Maybe unknown, but actually, you know, under safeguarding, it's really key. And actually, if it's self-neglect, that's very, hopefully, self-explanatory, that actually the person is unable, for specific reasons, to be able to care for themselves. And some of that may be about capacity, but then we also need to refer to the self-neglect guidance on NSAB website. Self-neglect is not that somebody is starting to become frail and you can see that they're not able to care for themselves in the same way as they did before. That's a Care Act referral, and actually they may need care and support. So it's very, very important to look at that guidance around self-neglect and really understand what that is. So the other thing about this framework is around encouraging internal discussion. So within your own organisation and with your safeguarding leads, before the referral's made, and that actually you record your decision and the actions that are logged. Next slide, please. So what happens when a referral is made? So the local authority has that statutory duty. So the decision-making framework explains the use of screening under that 3-step criteria to decide on the most proportionate response if the criteria is met. So Changi's mentioned proportionality, and that's really, really key in safeguarding. I talked earlier around making safeguarding personal, and that actually the response needs to be proportionate, but needs to relate to what the person wants as an outcome. And I think that's really, really key. It's also a decision on the information that's received, or whether we need to do further fact finding. So again, the more information that we have, the better we can decision making that we can make. So if we decide that it actually meets the 3-stage criteria, our duty is to undertake inquiries. If it doesn't meet that criteria, then we will inform you that it doesn't meet that criteria and the reason why we have made that decision. So that then you've got that as the decision making. If you're not happy with the decision that we've made, and actually you've got further information, then please do come back to us as local authorities. And we can then review. But when we look to undertake inquiries, there's a number of things that we can do. We can cause other people to make inquiries. What that means is we can ask for the most appropriate organisation to undertake an inquiry on our behalf. So some of this may be we ask a clinician, for example, at Northampton General Hospital. We ask a clinician to undertake an inquiry as they've got that sort of specialist knowledge and clinical knowledge to undertake a really robust inquiry. We can also go through the formal route where we undertake our own inquiries, and that's the formal route. However, just to mention what an inquiry actually is, under the Care Act doesn't state what an inquiry should be. It can be something as simple as making a number of phone calls, or it could be something that's really significant, like a really in-depth investigation. Because what we need to do is understand what has happened and how we can reduce the risk and stop it reoccurring. Based on that, that's our decision making as to what type of inquiry will be undertaken. So we could have something that meets the 3-stage criteria. It's a medium risk, but actually there's some really simple actions that can be undertaken to reduce that risk. We don't need to take a really full, long inquiry to undertake that. However, some of our inquiries can be very complex. We deal with individuals. There may be lots of different types of abuse that we need to look at, and it may be quite difficult then to sort of put all the different pathways together. So we've got a number of different ways where that we undertake inquiries. The duty to undertake inquiries does not mean that the local authority safeguarding duty is that we have to undertake all of the actions ourselves. The decision around what happens should be a multi-agency discussion, and agencies working with the local authority to make sure that we've got a plan in place that we mitigate those risks. So it should be a discussion between all parties, including the person that is at risk, all persons, because we do have large-scale inquiries with multiple people involved. Key thing to this is, I've mentioned, is around safeguarding plan and making sure the plan's put together. So that may be that, actions, and actually when those actions have been completed, we're assured that the risks have been reduced. Quite often, as we're going through an inquiry, we work with organisations to put the plan together, and quite often a lot of the actions have already been undertaken. Because we want to work through an inquiry with you as referrers. Safeguarding reviews. We will review safeguarding plans to make sure that actually they're robust. What we don't want is repeated referrals of the same things, because actually that just shows us that we haven't removed or reduced any risk whatsoever. So safeguarding reviews are really important. Safeguarding adult reviews and the Safeguarding Board are really important And they're really important where we may not have reduced or removed a risk, or a risk remains and actually a significant incident has occurred. So outcomes from an inquiry, I've talked about risk is being removed, risk is reduced, or risk remains. It's not a failure if they haven't been removed. There are many, many different reasons why a risk it still remains. So the difference of risk reduced is that actually we've reduced the risk, but there's elements that will remain. There's no further action that's required. We've done everything we can, but actually sometimes we have to ensure, we have to accept that not all the risks are going to be reduced. Risk remains, where there are risks that remains, there should be a safeguarding plan put in place so that actually everybody knows that actually these risks are here and they remain, and actually this is the sort of multi-agency action, or the action that needs to be taken to manage that risk. So this is very sort of long and short explanation of the decision-making framework. If you look in the NSAB website, you'll be able to go through in a lot more detail. As I say, at the end, there's some examples. So we give some very brief examples of different types of risk. And actually, so case examples. So example 1 talks about Mrs. Patel. She received the wrong medication from a member of care staff in a care home on one occasion. No harm's been caused, and it was an isolated incident. So if you go back to those key considerations, hasn't happened before. She's the only person to receive that wrong medication. The tablets are now in a marked Medipack. Action's been taken, so the likelihood of this happening again is minimised. This is a low-level risk. It can be managed appropriately by the service. Discuss and further actions are discuss the matter in supervision with the person who gave the wrong medication. Ensure the organisation's disciplinary process is used to investigate in order to put in the appropriate safeguards. The staff member is advised about the implications of doing this in line with that process, and the investigation internally will identify if other actions are required, for example, further training. So there's a number of case examples, and that will sort of take you through that sort of key consideration in the decision-making framework. Next slide. So that's it from me. We did say we were going to do it quicker than we did when we launched it. But I don't know if there's any questions that anybody wants to put to us around the decision-making framework and how people have found it so far. Hi, Will.
Will.
Hello, I can hear you, Will.
Hi, yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned about multi-agency discussions and decisions and things like that. So I was just wondering how you decide what agencies you speak to, you talk to during those decisions, and do you have, you know, specific organisations that you speak to for when you're supporting someone in the LGBTQ+ community and different communities like that? How does that happen? How does that work?
For us, it depends on a number of things. So it could be the location, so sort of the location of the abuse. So some examples of that, Will, are if it's in a care home, then obviously what you'd want to understand is who are the commissioners, who are the people that are potentially paying for the care in that home. It could be a self-funder, so you know you're looking at then obviously that individual's circle of friends. Obviously, it's a regulatory service, so then it would be CQC. If it's a nursing home, you would consider health, so the ICB, and obviously those quality issues. In the community, it'd be more around, Will, the circle of support that the individual has. So it would depend on, what type of accommodation, what's that sort of friendship group, are they receiving any other sort of community support? Because you're quite right, there's lots of organisations within the community that could offer support to that individual. So I think it's hard to say that we do exactly the same thing, because we don't, because it all does depend on that individual. Does that help? Thanks, Will. Sue?
Thank you very much. In the past, when I've done a safeguarding referral, obviously we look at all the other things that we can put in place. The safeguarding is the last resort. And when it's for self-neglect due to dementia, which is really common in our work, we fill out the form as best we can, giving as much information, including contacts for other agencies that have been involved. The problem we have is that when that safeguarding goes through, very often it's picked up, always picked up, but they make a call to the patient. And with dementia, they don't recognise that they've got a problem. They don't recognise that they've not washed in a year or not taking their tablets or anything like that. And then, of course, it then comes back, it's not a safeguarding because the person in question is denying any problems. How can we get round that other than writing on the form, please do not call this person?
I think the thing is, if they've got significant others, so, if you know of any other family relationship.
No. These would be people with no friends and no family.
No friends and no family. Yeah. I think, to me, what I would say is as much information as you possibly can on the concern form. So around capacity is that from a GP perspective, are you general practice? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
General
from a
Practice
GP,
Alliance. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. So from that professional perspective, actually, whoever's identified that there's an issue, so it's probably going to be a health professional, isn't it, that's gone out, seen the person, identified that there may or may not be an issue. Actually, articulating that you've had that conversation with the person in the first place. Does that make sense? So when it comes through and you put capacity, you can say, actually, they have been diagnosed, or the GP identifies the mental disorder. And then in the consent, we have had the conversation with, and this was the sort of result of the conversation. Does that make sense? So that actually identifies to us that you've already done that, you've had the conversation, and the person is denying they have any issues at all.
So it's all about the wording.
Just to add that,
because what we have is we have on the form that capacity. Not quite often we have no capacity. It doesn't mention why they haven't got it, and then you put consent not considered. Well, actually, what you're saying is you have considered it, and you know that actually you've had that conversation, and the person's denying they need that support. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Very often I will put has no insight. To their condition rather than capacity. Should I be writing specifically capacity, or would the insight thing?
Yeah, I think in the consent, in the element of consent, is you should always have that discussion regardless of somebody's capacity. If you're supporting somebody, you need to have that conversation and say, I am concerned because, And I think it's just that simple wording, isn't it? I'm concerned because the person says, but I'm okay because I can walk down to the shop every day, I can do X, Y, and Z, but you know that's not the case because there's no food in the house.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be War and Peace, and I think people, when we talk about capacity and consent, I think they have to go down that whole saga of, you know, doing a whole capacity assessment.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's just 2 or 3 really clear sentences that you've had a discussion, this is your professional opinion, and then we need to take it on board.
Thank you. That's very useful. Thank you very much.
No problem, Sue.
Yeah. Thanks, Sue, and thanks for that comprehensive answer, Claire. Just to add that self-neglect policy is being updated, isn't it? I think it's going to go on a website soon. But in what Claire just said, that and we also explained that making safeguarding personal is quite important to understand the consent. But in this case, we look at it from perspective that safeguarding is everybody's business. And like Claire said, just put it simply what the situation is and what your concerns are around self-neglect, because it is quite difficult because individuals can have a different perspective as to what harm or risks they are actually going through, and they may want to take those risks. But it's quite very important that you set out the facts, and always, like we said, that this framework really encourages to pick up that phone and have that conversation, speak with your managers, speak with your safeguarding leads, and really the local authorities are there too to guide and take you through that. I'm also adding, I'm also adding within the chat how you can actually make referrals, not just for West, but for NNC as well as MASH. So although you will see it in the presentation, but I'm just adding in the chat as well if you want to copy and keep that with you when making referral. We got someone else as well?
Yeah, I got Paula.
I can't see the name.
Hello, it's Paula Swain. I'm safeguarding nurse for NHFT. Mostly children's specialism. I work in MASH, but actually we do cross over. We do a bit of adult safeguarding as well. Will this? I've made some notes, but will this session be on the Safeguarding Adults Board website? Because I think some of my colleagues would probably find this really useful because it's really helpful. Thank you. That's great. Thanks very much. It's been really helpful.
Yeah, it's on there. And we've also said that, you know, if you've got a sort of group of people.
We just need to get that work. Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
I was going to say, if you've got a group of people, depending on if it's West or North, obviously, that you specifically want to have sort of any of the sort of smaller sessions, we don't have that much time, but it's really important to us that we get the right things through. It's a little bit like the emergency services in some ways. You know, what we've seen is we've had a doubling of the amount of safeguardings that are received in the last 2 years, which is great that people understand safeguarding, but our conversion rates are really low. So they're down to about 20–25%. So 75% are not actually safeguarding. So we're really keen on making people understand, you know, where they say, you know, where people ring the police all the time and then the real crimes don't get investigated. It's sort of, for us, we want to make sure that the people who need us can get through to us. So we're more than happy to do any sort of briefing sessions to sort of any of your organisations to support that understanding. And I think sometimes it's about just giving you the permissions that actually you know what you're doing, you're managing the risks yourselves, and how you can, you know, go down different pathways in relation to how you support somebody. So, you know, I'm sure Changis will agree, we much prefer you to ask for help.
And the examples which Claire just taken through, that physical abuse example, you would see that for different types of abuse, whether it's financial, whether it's discriminatory, whether it's modern slavery, it takes you through. There's a comprehensive examples in there, and there are some case studies as well within the decision-making framework. And if you haven't seen it, it is actually now saved on the NSAB's web page as well.